Now, applications of inverses is something you actually use a decent bit in life. You probably just don't really think of the mathematical side of things. So here's my example. The formula for the area of a circle is a equals pi r squared. Use that a lot in geometry. We want to find the inverse of the function. So right now my formula is saying, hey, if I know the radius, I can figure out the area. Okay. The inverse of the function will go the opposite way. So normally when we find the inverse of a function, we switch our variables around. Let's start off doing that and see what happens. If I switch my variables, if I switch my x and my y, my a and my r in this case, I would get r equals pi times a squared. The radius is pi times the area squared. That doesn't really make sense, right? Okay, so when we are doing applications, when our equation has a real meaning, we don't want to switch our variables around. We just want to find what the other variable equals. We want to solve for the other variable. Okay, so I'm adding that note here. When the equation has real meaning, don't switch variables. Just solve for the other. So in this case, I don't want to switch my variables around. I just want to solve for r. I want to get the r by itself. Okay. So a equals pi r squared. I'm going to rewrite that over here. To get this r by itself, the first thing I really need to do is divide by pi. And then square root both sides. So r is the square root of a over pi. Okay. Now normally if I have to square root both sides, I would use plus or minus. But since this is telling me what our radius is, I couldn't have a negative radius. So I don't need that plus or minus here. Okay. So there's my inverse. R is the square root of a over pi. Now, these inverses can be helpful for situations like the second question here. What is the radius of a circle with area 30 feet? Okay. If I plug in 30 feet for my area, I can take 30 divided by pi, square root. That tells me what my radius is. Okay, it's just another way of getting there. And again, I could have also plugged 30 into my equation here and solved for r the same way. But if you had a bunch of different circles you were looking at that you were trying to find the radius of, having this inverse is going to be helpful. All right. So the second piece here, if my area is 30 feet, r is the square root of 30 over pi. And I'll just type this in your calculator. Don't forget that your calculators have a button for pi. Trying to get this out of the glare a little bit. Okay. 30 divided by pi. The button is right here, the second, and then the caret. Oops. And then square root of that. So my radius would be about 3.09 feet. Okay. Again, the key idea from this problem, if your equation has a real meaning, don't switch the variables. Just solve for the other.